You're in for some interesting debate. It is no secret that Whoopi Goldberg had some absurd takes on a wide range of topics. Although she'd won multiple awards for her roles in the entertainment industry, her takes on political and societal issues are usually distasteful and out of touch. For instance, she has a different definition of race, which has led to a massive controversy in the past. She's also a woke leftist who thinks that it's a sin to have differing views than hers. Now, to put such a force of nature against a rational and straightforward person like Rand Paul, you'll get some of the golden moments that I'm about to show you. Before I get into the video, watch this clip.
Why anyone objects to getting rid of automatic weapons. Automatic weapons, they're not for hunting. They do nothing. They're only there to kill. And you'll notice that a lot of the things that have happened with automatic weapons. When we see that, why don't we say, you know, who really needs to have one other than people who are at war?
Truly automatic weapons we don't have. You know, we banned truly automatic weapons, I think, in 1930.
Right, but we still got a lot of them, Rand. Come on,
well,
man.
what we have is not automatic weapons, so we have semi-automatic. So they fire in a fairly fast sequence, but you can't pull the trigger and they come like a machine gun. Those are no longer out.
But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying.
It's funny to me how Senator Paul explained in detail to her the difference between a full auto and semi-auto weapon, but she kept deflecting on the point since it didn't suit her agenda. Then she fully mischaracterized it in the end. I'll further clarify the difference between these weapons since there's a common misconception in debates around gun laws in the US. Many people believe that automatic weapons are freely available to the public when in reality they're heavily regulated and essentially banned for most civilians under current federal law. Automatic weapons or machine guns fire continuously as long as the trigger is pressed down, there's ammunition in the magazine. While semi-automatic weapons or assault weapons require one trigger pull per shot, boom, 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 and then the next round is cycled into the chamber, which can be fired with an additional trigger pull. This type of action is common in many handguns and rifles used for sports shooting, hunting, and personal defense. By the way, make sure to subscribe for more discussions like this. The ownership and transfer of automatic weapons in the United States have been severely restricted since the National Firearms Act of 1934. This legislation came in response to the widespread use of machine guns by organized crime figures in the 1920s and early 1930s. The NFA requires individuals purchasing weapons undergo a thorough ATF background check, register the weapon, and pay a tax. Further restrictions were added to the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986, which included the Hughes Amendment that prohibits civilians from owning automatic weapons manufactured after the law took effect in May 1986. As a result, the only automatic weapons legally available to the general public in the US are those that were registered with the federal government before the 1986 cutoff. Because no new automatic weapons can be registered for civilian use, the ability supply is finite and extremely expensive, making them inaccessible to most people. And that's a common theme with Whoopi. She just reiterates her point once she runs out of arguments, and let me tell you something, she runs out of them very quickly.
The other problem is if we're going to take away ownership of specific types of guns, you really have to modify something that big as to either be legislation or even possibly a constitutional amendment. We can't allow one individual to do it. That's the danger of letting a president make the rules. Even if you agree with what he's doing now, you should worry about having a president have so much power to create the law without Congress doing it. Montesquieu is one of the philosophers that our founding fathers looked to, and he said that when the executive begins to legislate, that a form of tyranny will ensue.
I'm sorry, man. There's no reason anybody needs to have an automatic weapon. I'm sorry. I get everything else.
The Founding Fathers were keenly aware of the dangers posed by tyranny, having fought for independence from the British monarchy. Their experiences under colonial rule heavily influenced their decision to implement a system where powers were separated among three branches and thus divided government responsibilities into three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial, each with its own powers and responsibilities. This separation is essential not only for maintaining a balance of power, but also for providing a system of checks and balances. Each branch has the ability to check the powers of the others, ensuring that all government actions are subject to scrutiny and opposition if they threaten the liberty of the people. For example, while the president can veto legislation, Congress can override this veto with a sufficient majority. Similarly, the judiciary has the power to declare laws or executive actions unconstitutional, curbing any overreach by the other two branches. This interdependence then ensures the powers not only separated but balanced, making unilateral government action difficult and thus safeguarding against tyranny. There's also the danger of setting precedents when it comes to any branch of government overstepping the boundaries set by the Constitution. Once a power is assumed by a branch beyond its scope, it establishes a new norm that future office holders can reference and build upon. This is particularly dangerous in situations where the breach of power is not immediately or effectively contested, as it subtly shifts the balance of power. Over time, these small shifts can accumulate, leading to a reduction in the checks and balances intended to protect democratic governance and individual freedoms. That's what Senator Paul was trying to explain to her, but Whoopi tries to prove herself as an expert, and it reaches a stage that her persistence isn't so easily ignored. It's a typical woke tactic that we've seen time and time again.
We talked about his wanting to pull troops out of Syria, and everyone saying, if we do that, we're abandoning the Kurds. That's not a good idea. And a lot of folks are saying he crossed the line with a bad decision, but you don't say that. Why?
You know, one of the things I've always supported about President Trump is actually one of the things I liked about President Obama, that we said we were overextended, that the Iraq war was a mistake. I think it's one of the reasons President Obama beat Hillary Clinton, because Hillary Clinton had supported the Iraq war. I still think the Iraq war, regime change in the Middle East, and these wars are senseless. So does President Trump. He doesn't want to get us involved in another Iraq war in Syria. If anything, Syria is more complicated. The other is a practical concern. You have 50 soldiers. They're talking about moving 50 soldiers. Who goes to war with 50 soldiers?
That's typical from a woke leftist trying to paint the United States as the world's police force, and I agree with Paul when it comes to Trump, as he was the only president in modern history to not start a war. But Obama can't get that passed since he participated in the toppling of the Libyan leader Gaddafi in 2011, as well as taking out legitimate American civilians. Such actions not only destabilized different regions worldwide, but also resulted in significant loss of life and human suffering. It also damages the United States' international reputation, as diplomatic solutions are sidelined in favor of military action, which is rarely effective in achieving long-term peace and stability, and raises questions about the role and the intentions of the US in global affairs. There's also the point of American involvement in multiple regime changes, which has proven to be an enormous drain on economic and military resources. The power vacuums created in the wake of toppled governments have frequently led to chaos and the emergence of extremist groups such as ISIS, which capitalized on the instability in Iraq and Syria. Another example of the nation-building efforts in Afghanistan, which has cost the US taxpayers over $2 trillion, which not only ended in complete failure, but billions of dollars in equipment were also left behind due to an unorderly exit from the country under the leadership of Joe Biden. This financial burden has diverted funds from critical domestic needs such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure. The opportunity costs of these conflicts are colossal, and one can only imagine what could have been achieved had these resources been allocated differently. But Whoopi doesn't comprehend that people have the right to hold a different view than her, and keeps on repeating her point in a different manner.
If you have allies and they are working with you and fighting with you, and 24 hours somebody wakes up and says, "No, we're out." Right. Is that the right way to do this?
I think the way we look at wars, we don't look at
No. Is that the right way to do it?
Let me answer the question.
Okay.
When we decide whether or not we're sending our young people into harm's way, we should obey the Constitution, which says we should declare war and put them in a war theater. But let me finish.
Okay.
And here's the thing about it, is if you ask these people, Lindsey Graham and the Cheney war and all these warmongers that want to stay at war forever, who are we going to declare war on? They don't know who. We're going to declare war on Turkey, our ally.
Should we
the
ever
Free Syrian
walk
Army,
out
ally?
in the middle? It's like walking out.
We should never be there in the first place.
That's not the question, though.
Although the US president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and has the authority to make critical decisions, Congress approval is needed to proceed with the declaration of war, especially after the War Power Resolution was enacted by Congress in the aftermath of the Vietnam War, to check the president's power to commit the US into an armed conflict. Under this resolution, the president can send US armed forces into action only by a declaration of war by Congress, or in case of a national emergency created by attack upon the United States, its territories or possessions, or its armed forces. There have been numerous instances where presidents have initiated military operations without prior congressional approval, such as in 1999 in Kosovo, 2011 in Libya, and various counterterrorism operations worldwide. These actions were often conducted under the justification of protecting American interests, promoting human rights, or preventing a larger conflict. But in the case of Syria, the situation is so complex, I bet the entire panelists of the wouldn't be able to name any of the other participant groups within the war. The US intervened in eastern Syria under the excuse of counterterrorism operations against ISIS, which has largely been defeated and is a shell of its former self. So pulling out of that area is not only logical, but it also saves taxpayer money, since the US expenditure on operations in Iraq and Syria between 2014 to 2021 is past $55 billion. I think it's safe to say that debating someone like Whoopi is tired and fruitless. Although she has someone like Rand Paul as her guest, she wasn't swayed a bit, even though all her arguments were debunked right in her face, and instead she resorted to repeating the same points or outright interrupting her guest and talking over him.